Hi, JVC. This is Johnny. I'm one of the pastors here at Jordan Valley Church, and we are talking about prayer. This video is called Praying with Others 101. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video is because sometimes it's hard for us to pray with other people. But we want to help you get over that hurdle, because praying with others is kind of just like meeting with close friends and sharing stories, sharing a meal, having a good time, and sharing each other's hearts, sharing each other's lives, having deep conversations. But it's better than that because we get to do that towards God and continue our continual conversation with God, with other Christians. And it's a real blessing to be able to do it. And so we want to help you. So the purpose of this video is not to go into theological details, but to help you with the basics of how to pray with others. So hopefully it's helpful. Praying with others can be awkward. And one of the reasons why is because there can sometimes feel like a whole lot of lack of clarity. We sort of expect that other people know what we're thinking, but we forget that only God really knows what we're thinking in our prayer. So it's not like praying privately, where we can pray anytime out loud or in our minds. There needs to be a few ground rules. So let me lay some ground rules for praying with others. So first of all, ground rules for a prayer circle. In a prayer circle, usually one person leads, and then another person will end it, and then in between, what happens is the prayer circle goes around, and each person in a circle, it usually is shaped in a circle, and if you're going to do a true prayer circle, it should be shaped in a circle so that there's clarity there. People will take turns praying. Sometimes you pray for the prayer requests that have been made by the person previous or sitting next to you, but you go around in a circle and each person gets their turn to pray. And if this happens, sometimes it can get awkward, because if it comes to you and you're not super comfortable, it feels like you have to pray and you don't have the words to pray. Maybe you feel like it's awkward because you don't know what to say to God. You're afraid of what other people might think. If that happens to you, I'd encourage you to try to say something. You see, prayer is not a performance. Prayer is a conversation with God. So just say something, the first thing that comes to your heart, or to your mind. Say something to God. I guarantee you that other people in the prayer circle are not listening, trying to figure out if you're going to say the right thing or not. They want to know your heart too. And practicing is the only way that you'll grow. But if you don't feel comfortable praying, you don't have to. A prayer circle should never be a coercive way to get everyone to say something. Just tap the person next to you and let them know that it's their turn to pray if that happens to you. Most often though, and I think in my experience most often here at JVC, the way that public prayer or praying with others happens is that one person begins, one person ends, and in between it's almost like an open mic, kind of like at a wedding reception, where there's an open mic and anyone can come up and say something, and anyone in the room, in the prayer circle, or in the room praying can say a prayer. And if that happens, it's a good way to avoid that coerced prayer awkwardness. But another kind of awkwardness can happen, and that's when there's an awkward silence, where no one prays for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 seconds. And if that happens, it can feel really weird. There's really no other situation in our life where we encounter that. But if that does happen, and I've experienced it more times than I can count in prayer circles, and since being here in small group or in our pre-service prayer time, that happens all the time. And when it happens, let me encourage you, embrace that awkwardness. Embrace that moment in the middle of it when no one is saying anything, and you and 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 other believers are sitting in a room together, silent, because you're in the presence of God, and you have an opportunity there, and knowing that everyone else around you is doing the same thing, to make a silent prayer to God. And then maybe you'll feel led to pray, and even if you don't, that's okay. The best thing to do in that situation is just to embrace that feeling, and over time that'll feel less and less awkward. When someone's praying, pray along with them. For me, the hardest thing to do often is to focus on what other people are saying and pray with them. But try to remember that you also are taking part in what's going on. It's not just the other person praying, and that's it. Prayer is not a performance, and even praying in front of other people or with other people is not a performance. Prayer is something that we do together towards God. And so you can actually help them out. Think of it as you're helping bring that prayer that the other person is making to God. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about prayer in our worship services. Because in our worship services, our prayers with other people are even more special than when we get to do it with 10 or 15 other people. Because when we pray with others in a worship service, it's the whole church. It's like the difference between singing in the shower and then singing with a choir of 50 or 100 other people. It's glorious and exciting and this really special time that we get to pray to our God together. Now, the main practical difference is that there's one person leading it, the person speaking through a microphone at the front of the room up on stage. And so their prayer is going to be longer as he's leading the congregation in prayer. And it's important for them, and if you're one of the people that leads prayers from the front, it's important for you, and you know this, to be clear and passionate and God-glorifying in your prayer, because you're leading the whole church in prayer. But for most of you, and most of us who are sitting in the congregation, praying along with them, it can be hard when that pastor or elder who's leading the prayer has an off day and actually gives a boring prayer or one that's not very clear or hard to follow along with. So how do you pay attention to their prayer when their prayer is putting you to sleep, basically? Well, first of all, remember, as I've said before, prayer is not a performance, it's a conversation with God. It's talking to God. Your role, even sitting in a congregation in the chair while someone else is praying, is not just to pay attention, but it's to help the prayer leader's prayers. So think of your silent prayers in that moment as being an echo that reverberates up to God, leading that prayer, helping that prayer along. And that's one of the reasons why our corporate prayers and worship are so special, because it's a large number of other people praying together in unison to God. And even though you're praying silently, God hears your heart. Remember that. What about distractions around you in the worship service? Maybe there's noises, or someone spills something and you're tempted to look over, or there's rowdy kids in front of you, or your own rowdy kids behind you. Maybe you look outside and you see something outside that grabs your attention. Or maybe your cell phone. You get a text or an email or a phone call during a prayer. What do you do then? Well, preparing beforehand is a good thing to do. So turn off your phone or put it on silent, put it in your pocket or on your purse, somewhere where you're not going to feel tempted to be distracted by it. This is a good time to close your eyes and bow your heads just so that you're less distracted. If you have kids, try to teach them, try to explain to them why we are silent, why we try not to move around so much. And even if you have little kids and they don't understand those things, encourage them at least physically to fold their hands and bow their heads. It's not just really cute, although it is, but it will help lay a foundation for them of a life of prayer. And find creative ways to encourage them to do this, even if it's just giving them a snack in that moment. But of course, our kids will have off days too, and so do we. Some kids just can't sit still. Sometimes we just can't sit still. Sometimes our minds just can't sit still. And sometimes we really do struggle to pay attention to what the leader is praying. So if your kids can't pay attention, if you can't pay attention, if it's not going well, remember, prayer is not a performance. God, He doesn't judge you, and you're not going to ruin the prayer for the rest of us just because you're not paying attention. You don't come to prove your worth with your prayers before God. You come to meet with God because of Jesus. Because of Jesus, the only perfect prayer in all of history, we can come and meet with God in prayer. And we can do that together. So I really want to encourage you, even if you've come distracted or with distracted kids, it's better to be distracted with God in prayer than to have not come at all. So try it. Next time we have prayer in a worship service, do your best to follow along and pray with the prayer leader. Well, that's about all our time for today. Thank you for listening, and happy praying.